Okay, hey Street T fam. Of course, me. We're gonna have some commentary today. We're gonna talk a little bit about the things that we can expect from Street T family. First off, I want to welcome you guys. The launch was amazing. I also want to talk about the group. Make sure that when you go to the page, you like, you follow, you definitely go ahead and share. We definitely want you to get the content out there, get the information out there, so that we can, try to spread, some of the information and kind of try to change the rhetoric, you know what I mean? And change the way that we think about the language of racism and a lot of stuff that we say and do every day. And, as well as current topics that are coming up and basically affecting us and, the African American community. So, I do want to dig in. First of all, I want to give a shout out to my production team, which will be Money to Burn. We got a lot of things that we're going to be doing between musical content, which is also going to be a part of the language of racism. Because of course, as African Americans, that is a part of our not only our history, but our everyday life. So I definitely want you guys to look forward to that. The next installment, which will be part 3 of Language of Racism, we call it the Voices of Dissent, will be what we'll be highlighting next. Okay. It's a lot of information. I definitely want to go over some stuff. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to read The Prejudice of a Patriot. It was a story that I was inspired to write because of a lot of the things that are going on in the media today that are affecting our African American community and things that are being said about us, and also the way that we have reacted to a lot of the things that have been said about us. So that was the reason why, a little bit of backstory behind the scenes, why I decided to write this particular blog article. So just to keep that in mind as we start to talk about a little bit of things that actually are going on in the video. One of the things that one of the things, as we're going over the things that's in the blog, one of the things that I do want to touch upon, because it's very easy to become a voice of dissent. And what do I mean by that? That means like, someone that, kind of, when you're doing your thing or whatever you may be into, what you're doing, and someone is talking about it in a negative manner or basically, putting that situation down. And we have a lot of that going on right now, especially talking about the kneeling of the flag, because at the end of the day, as Americans, that's something that we all hold, you know, near and dear, whether it's with animosity or it's with a lot of love. And that's just the real deal. We live in a country where, and just like every other country, we have a flag that represents us, that represents us as United States of America. However, right now, there's a lot of commentary and a lot of pushback because of Confederate flags. And without getting real deep into that, because that there will be a time and a place for us to address that. However, just real quick to say, historically speaking, that flag represents some states that decided to get together. They decided to go against the United States, in fact, becoming their enemy. If you want to take it a step further, we could call them traitors. That's who anybody else would be looked at if they came upon American soil and declared war upon the United States. The reason why they did that was because of slavery. It was going out of style, should we say. Progressively speaking, there was a lot of Euro-American people who wanted to move forward with cotton mills and things of that nature. Financially speaking, it was just like, we don't need to be involved in something so such an atrocity if we don't have to be. We have other options here. We want to go with this. Politically speaking, it was just, a stance that was taken by the South, a lot of southern states. I'm not going to say all of the South. I'll say a lot of southern states where they did not agree with that, and they fought for their right to maintain having slaves, the right to have slavery. They did not want that abolished. So with that being said, that was the flag that they used. You can break that down however you want to break that down. But that is actually, in fact, the history. Okay, so unless you are excited about being having body slaves, having slaves work for you, or you're excited about slavery in general, you do not like black people, or people you feel like you are a more superior race. I don't have any commentary as to why anything other than that will be a reason for enjoying that flag, honoring that flag. Okay, I'm not going to get any more in depth with that. I just want to leave that where it lay. Okay, moving forward now, how does that apply to, because we're always doing how the history applies to the things that we are talking about, the things that we're seeing today, why we are addressing these issues today anyway, in the first place, if you will. So the kneeling of the flag has become a really big thing. We have recently seen the NFL make a really big turnaround. A lot of players have stood up, to kind of get this right, because for some time now, we had a NFL player who was really going hard against racism and police brutality by the name of Colin Kaepernick. He did that because, he felt that racism and police brutality need to be addressed. Now, of course, you know what I'm saying, there was people that were saying, oh, he's disrespecting the flag. He's not kneeling during the national anthem. And of course, now during this time, now we're talking about how the national anthem has this third verse. And everybody wants to get rid of the national anthem now, and it's just like, when you think about these type of things and you think about the people who lived during these times that these things was going on, you got to take a really big, wide look at United States of America and how they're dealing with the African American community, how they're dealing with, integration of what we would perceive that is freed slaves. Well, we wasn't slaves when we got here. They took us from where we was at and brought us here and then became slaves. But I'm just saying, these things that they're addressing and they're talking about as far as like, veterans, disrespecting veterans, it's absurd when I hear it as an African American woman, because I know the history of African American people in this country and how they fought and died in order to, preserve that right of what that flag represented. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And when you have another flag, a Confederate flag, that is so offensive to so many African Americans who have went out to war, namely, let's go back to that time when that was actually happening. So many African Americans were fighting for their freedom, fighting for their rights, fighting for, a voice, a vote, if you will. So many things have happened, and things that have went on, but in those times, those were the things that was on the table as far as what the African American community was fighting for, and some of them are still things that we are still fighting for. And that's the absolute truth. So that is the reason, in case anybody's very confused at this point, why the Confederate flag will be a problem for anybody who's of African descent and is African American in the United States. That is the reason why. I mean, this is in direct contrast of anyone that would have a person that was a veteran, anyone that would have a person that, fought for that flag and believed in that flag. The reason why those players are kneeling is because if that flag represents freedom and that flag represents freedom of speech, the right to vote, the Second Amendment, then why, as African Americans in the United States, are we still fighting for those rights when we watch our troops boot up and go to all these other countries and fight for those rights for other people? It's kind of like a contradiction within itself. But stay tuned, because we're going to get to that too. So one of the first things that I want to talk about, because, the Prejudice of a Patriot was something that was near and dear to my heart. The reason why it was near and dear to my heart was because of the simple fact that they were activists. Okay? Right now, we are living in the times where people are having their activists activated. At this point in time, that was the norm. We were, if you were black and anything that you were trying to do that was outside of being, slave labor was considered being an activist. I mean, you were going against the grain. And to be a soldier in the army. I mean, let's talk about World War I, first of all. I want to talk about World War I. A lot of things that happened in World War One, it's a very interesting time. It was the early 1900s. America is still very young at that point in time. And I always like to say that, I always like to reference that because I like for people to understand that as a country, we are still growing. A lot of things, a lot of countries have been here for centuries and centuries and centuries, dating back to, oh, I don't know, you take your pick. Like I said, we consider, in contrast to that, we are a very young country. So as I was saying, in World War One and World War Two, there was a lot of people that were signing up for the military. They were trying to get their freedom. They were trying to get their rights. They were trying to get, that second class citizenship out of the way. And one of the things that you got to understand is that even though the things that that are in the article, and they talk about a lot of the, funny, social distancing, which was really segregation at that point in time that was taking place. Even in the soldier barracks, if you were an officer in the army and you were African American, if a soldier of a lower rank, were to pass you or whatever the case may be, he did not have to salute you unless he was African American himself. So, I mean, the disrespect was there, because even now, I would like to believe that that would not be the case. I mean, these are people that you're serving with. If he is an officer, he deserves the respect that his title entitles him to. And that is the way our military has always operated, and it's like that, all across the globe. But in this situation, it was not that way. And we're talking about the early 1900s, okay? We're talking about 1917. There's only one black company that has all black military officers. And even if they are officers, they're not dining with the officers. They're not in the officers club. That's not happening. They're dining with their soldiers, the men that serve underneath them. And of course, in normal circumstances, if you find someone that is in a position of authority that, humbles themselves to do things like this, of course, that's always violent, and we recognize that. It's a violent act. But the point that I'm trying to point out is that this is not what that was about. This was about the prejudice that existed within the army. And even though that prejudice existed, you also got to think about, because I'm trying to get you in the mind frame of the times and what was actually going on. You got to think about the fact that the army was allowing them to be drafted. They was allowing them in World War I to come into the army and to serve. However, the Marines was not allowing this. Our Coast Guard was not allowing this. Our Navy, none of that was allowed. Black people were not allowed to serve in the military. And the Air Force wasn't even founded until 1947. So at this point, they're not relevant. One of the things that really stuck out to me when I began to write about them was that they were, very valiant soldiers. If you are a person that enjoys reading about World War I or World War II, you will find that these are some pretty interesting guys, to say the least. The Harlem Hellfighters are absolutely famous. I want to talk about them first, of course. Being from New York, I am a New York native. So, of course, my chest poked out a little bit with pride, just to know that, not twice, because once they are soldiers, their story is amazing. It needs to be told. Two, I felt that hometown vibe, and, they were well-renowned jazz players. They were known for introducing us to the French, because what you got to understand is the segregation went so deep that when they were called to arms and they were allowed to train before they went overseas, once they got overseas, their whole regiment was given to the French army. Yes, the whole regiment was just given away. It was basically like, hey, you need men, you need bodies. Hey, take them. You do as you will with them. And out of that, that fire was the desire to achieve, to have recognition, to, go out there and show them what they got. All right. The Harlem Hellfighters was known as the 369th Infantry Regiment. All of them actually received the French medal, the Croix de Guerre, and sadly, it's possible that I mispronounced that. Croix de Guerre. I want to say. Excuse me. I want to say it is. And they also got another 171 individual awards for exceptional gallantry in action to other members of the 93rd. Okay, so they were, racking up in awards. The 93rd Division actually consisted of several parts to it. It was the 371st Regiment, the 372nd Regiment, and all of them served together with the French. They actually ate with the French. They slept with the French. They learned French. They came there in the spring, and by the summer, that's when they started to actually join the fighting fray. So they were there for some time just trying to get at the linguistics of how they actually are going to eat, sleep, and breathe with French soldiers, because now these are their comrades. They're Americans, they're African Americans, but they are in France and they are out there serving their country in a foreign land, away from everything that, I guess would be familiar to them. So, we got to recognize that and the feat that even brought about, and how, how wild it is that that all of those barriers stood in their way. The segregation in training, the segregation in the barracks, the segregation in eating, and of course we weren't there every day, but you can imagine if, that was the atmosphere, the type of things that were happening and the type of things that were being said. And they made it through all of that to complete their training and to eventually go overseas and fight in the war. One of the things that I found very interesting about this article was a flag that I found. It's actually a French flag, and it has an American section in there for the service of the 371st Infantry for the Harlem Hellfighters. So they were definitely a formidable division, and they definitely put their stamp in history. If we're talking about World War I and we're talking about, African Americans serving, we're definitely talking about, the Harlem Hellfighters. Okay, they're going to hit the table. These guys are pretty, they're pretty incredible. And I wanted to put a highlight on them, the 371st Infantry that served along with them, because I thought that they were very interesting, because they were the only ones that were a whole colored infantry, and all of their officers were actually African American. Even though they lived separately, they actually served with the Euro-Americans that actually went over. So the 92nd was, 371st Infantry was part of the 92nd. They actually served in the World War I and World War II. So they were some pretty interesting characters as well. I wanted to include their pictures. I also looked back on some of the things that have come into play. Like the fact that, some of them were, very famous, like the 307th. They were called the Black Devils, and the Germans gave them that name. So, I mean, it's always interesting, to hear about the things that they went through and the things that they experienced. Even the 92nd, when they were fighting in World War II, they were, in enemy's line. They were behind enemy line. They were, they had them closed in on one side and closing on the other side. And they found their way through that. They battled through that. Then they actually rode on the top of their tanks to get away from minefields. I mean, they were doing some pretty wild stuff out there, to prove that they were not an inferior race. And even after all that, there was still a lot of, talk about them and things that, the way that, decision making and things of that nature, because of the prejudice that existed about Black people, that they were not smart enough, that they were not, capable of leading. They weren't capable of following orders. They weren't, things like that. So, I mean, this paper just really just tries to bring out, all of the facts, the real facts about what they are and, who they are and what they did to serve our country, and the respect that should be given for these veterans, these African Americans who have basically fought for our freedom, for white people's freedom too, Euro Americans, in World War I and World War II. This was not a African American thing. It's so far as this, we were not fighting for our rights so much as they were fighting for their rights to be free, their rights to have votes, their rights not to be considered as a second class citizen. Okay, so when you try to turn that around and say things like, "Well, you can't kneel on the flag. That's disrespectful to our veterans." The fact that you and I both know that they have been erased from history. I mean, I found so many articles talking about how, you know, the things that were said about them, it's possible that they were not true, or it's possible that it was written in error because of the way that they were perceived at that point in time, in that era of time. So, we got to be careful, with the language that we're using when we're talking about African Americans, patriotism, and service. Because the reality of the situation is that even in present day, there are a lot of African Americans that serve. We do, as a community, have a right to have a say so. And if we say that the flag represents something that's making us feel inequality, then I feel that we deserve the right to be heard, and not, try to cause dissent and say, "Oh, well, they're doing that to disrespect our veterans." If you can feel honor and you can feel respect and admiration, for the veterans that have served and the veterans that have served that look like you, then why can't you see that I'm going to use myself as an example. I would feel the same way. I have family members that have served. My sister has served. I mean, it's just when you get to topics like this and you hear things like that, it's kind of like you scratch your head and you try to figure out, how did they arrive to that conclusion? Did you just say that just because you can? It just absolutely makes no sense. And that's the thing. It just doesn't make sense. Okay. During their time of service during World War I want to read something that was written by one of the officers. After their service was over, he says, and I quote, "In defense of the black junior officers, I believe that the young Negro officer represents the best we have to offer, and under proper, sympathetic, and capable leadership, would have developed and performed equally with any other racial group. They were Americans before all else." So this was written by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus H. Ray. He was the commander of the 600 Field Artillery Battalion, which had all black officers in it. Okay. This is a man that actually assumed control. He, he was a colonel, a lieutenant colonel. Let me get it right. He was a lieutenant colonel. And this was what he felt after his service, because, there was so much naysaying about the things that they did over there. And of course, after World War I, when it was won, no one was celebrating or inviting the African Americans to the party, the celebration. That just didn't happen. Now, a lot of these infantries came from, cities like Chicago, South Carolina, North Carolina, New York, Baltimore, things like that. They came from these cities where a lot of African Americans were migrating because they, if they weren't from the South, they had migrated up north, trying to make a better life, trying to basically escape slavery, because back then they had a lot of laws and bylaws. If you were a criminal, you were basically, going to basically have slave labor. Okay. Let's keep it real. I am going to be addressing some of those things in my next paper. As I said, this is Language of Racism is actually a 7-part series, not to get off topic, but on topic. And I definitely want to have a situation where we can talk about all the things, and I just can't wait till all the information is out there, all the content is out there, and then we can come back together and we can take a look at it and be like, wow, when you really look at it from such an in-depth perspective, when you take those things that are still being spoken about today and you apply them to the history and the background that they actually came from, it paints a very ugly picture. And you got to ask yourself, are we that person or are we those people anymore? Because I know that I'm not a nigger. I know that I'm not a slave. So when you apply thoughts like that and you say certain things and you hold certain things like Confederate flags and statues dear to you, I begin to question, not only your integrity as a person, but your humanity as a human being, because you got to think to yourself that that was wrong. One of the things that have crossed my desk since I have been doing these historical research for language of racism, which is on several different topics, is the fact that lynching was just made illegal on a federal level in February of 2020. I think that's a very interesting fact, so I'm just going to leave that right there. Moving right along. There's a lot of different things that I wanted to discuss while we were having this video blog about language of racism. And so I did write a couple of notes just to make sure that I touched upon those things. Now, one of the things I do want to point out is whenever they were fighting with the French, they had to eat their food, they had to eat, sleep in their quarters. They actually, the only thing they really had was their hat to identify their United States uniform to identify them as United States soldiers. Now, even though the French did award them some awards, well, I'm not going to say some, I'm going to say a lot. Because a lot of them received very prestigious awards from the French army at their time of service. You know what I mean? It was not something that was given posthumously. When I say posthumously, that means after a person dies. A lot of these awards, the Medal of Honor recipients that have received, awards for their service did not receive them until after they died, which is a sad case, but it is the case. That is the truth. And this actually happened in 1997. And I want to just double check that. Yeah, 1997. So, it's really sad when you think about it that way, that the United States allowed them to go over there, serve their military, fight. Some of them died, never came home. A lot of them died broke in the United States because once they did that, they, were considered a threat, or, they may even have been targeted because of their service. I mean, it was just not, they just didn't come home to what they thought this was going to be. It just didn't happen that way. And it's really sad that this is the way that the world was then. Now, getting to the Medal of Honors. On January 16th, 1997, 7 recipients were given the Medals of Honors by President Clinton. Posthumously. Only one of them was still alive, so 6 of them received it posthumously. And you got to ask yourself, why would it take you 50-something years to give these men awards? When you read this article and you read about the feats that they encountered, and you read about the things that they went through, and all the things that they overcame to still go on and still serve, it's hard to believe that that is the case. They received the Legion of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross. It's just so many things that, they received medals for, and they waited so long to receive recognition. And, when you know those facts and you think about the fact that even right now, people are forgetting about their service, and they're saying things like, when you say, oh, well, police brutality and racism shouldn't be going on, a person will come back and say, oh, you like that kneeling of the flag, or you're disrespecting the veterans. We're not even talking about the veterans, but if we're going to talk about them, we're going to talk about them, and we're going to give them respect and the honor that they deserve for their valiant service. And we're going to realize and recognize that just like any other person that is American, Black and African Americans have just as much right to speak about them and feel respect. And, it should never be assumed that that's what is being said when a person is kneeling to the American flag. And that's just really one of the bigger points that I wanted to point out. So it seems that maybe that prejudice that was there could easily be regarded as disregard in the 20th century. Depends on how you look at it. Something that really caught my eye was the fact that not only did they serve in these armies, they lost family members, they lost friends. There were 770 African Americans that died in World War One. 708 African Americans died in World War II. I mean, these things are just facts. And this has nothing to do with the battle for racism or police brutality or kneeling to a flag. It just really does not. And these Confederate flags and monuments are really, really disrespectful. And I believe that they should come down, not because, they're not a part of history. They are a part of history. If I've seen them in a museum and I've seen the story being told, how I know it went down, I can respect that. But when I see it being waved around at a football or a football game or at a race car game, you got to think about why that would be there. Who would put that there? Why would it be there? Because of what it actually and does represent. And, no one at this point in time that's waving that flag can claim ignorance. They cannot say that it is just history, because there's a lot of history that I got that I wouldn't necessarily put on my front porch. But at the same time, I may or may not keep a keepsake. Everything ain't for everybody. And I think that, if we're dealing with the situation as a nation, that's something that ain't for everybody. And it's very disrespectful to several classes of citizens of the United States. And I do believe that needs to come down. And that's my personal opinion. But the point of my article was to address the fact that, the service of these men, to highlight their service, because they deserve a piece of history. They deserve a point in history where we look back and we acknowledge their service and we ask ourselves a question. And the question has to be, how could something like that happen, and how could they be forgotten and disregarded in conversation and used as, and disregarded in the way where, being a vet is being used against the Afro-American community. So you're not acknowledging that we have vets that are African-American, that we care about. Armed services right now, our sons and daughters, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews is serving right now. Right now. Not tomorrow, next week, last week, right now. So we got to really try to change this language, this rhetoric, the way that the conversation is being put across. And that is the reason why I wrote Prejudice of a Patriot. And I wanted to highlight in our history some amazing African Americans who served for our countries, amazing activists who fought for their right to be free, and for their right to have respect and dignity as a citizen of the United States. And I think that with the times that we're living in right now and a lot of things that's going on, I think that it was really important to address that and, think about that. While we're on the topic, I wanted to just say that, as with everything, I always try to be personal with you guys and not only just give you the content, but explain it to you in a manner that, you understand where I'm coming from, why, I was, pushed to do this. I believe, and I've been thinking, this is something that should be in our school systems. Historical facts, historical content that addresses, and tries to weed out the racism that is so heavily instilled in our society. It's one thing to teach a kid at home to be racist, and then they go to school and it's like, oh, well, they get this mild version of what slavery was about, and they don't understand why, some people feel so strongly about the N word, and want to be considered equal. If you can get to the point where you have that level of ignorance about the situation, then it's time for you as an adult to relearn what slavery was about. And that is your responsibility. I think we would live in a better world if the truth was actually taught in our classrooms. I remember when I was young and I first learned about slavery, and I was like, oh no, wait, what? So I had to, the me that I am, I love history. So of course I'm digging, I'm trying to find out. And that's when I realized that what I was taught in school was a very, very, very mild version of what indeed actually happened. And then they have these movies that have come out. I'm 40. I don't know how old you are. And they show, 12 Years a Slave, Harriet, things like that will come out. And this is when people are seeing a part of slavery that they've never seen before, never heard about before. They're looking at Aunt Jemima and they know why they're changing their logo. They're looking at Aunt Jemima like, oh well, this probably isn't right. We probably shouldn't be, showing this and making it seem like this is okay because it's probably not okay. So I mean, you got to take a look at that. You got to understand, where this is all coming from. Because I've actually read two things I want to address. A person saying, I'm not from Africa. And, oh, I forgot my thought real quick. It'll come back to me. But I want to quickly address that. I don't know what is wrong with the Black community. Everybody, and this is something that I began to understand as a teenager. Everybody has history as an American citizen, regardless of what country you originated from or your family originated from, your ancestors originated from. Everybody has a story. Everybody has history. Everybody has, a way, a swag about them that is expected and, for the most part, is accepted as a nation. Like we know, so many things about one another. And it's just sad to me. You know what I mean? Like, Chinese have, the food. Everybody loves Chinese food. You know what I'm saying? Indians have, stores. American Indians, they have stores. It's like, where is the part where African Americans are not embracing that is where we came from? What is moving you to say, I'm Black, I'm not African American? And I really would like some commentary on that. Like, I need somebody to make me understand. And I feel like Denzel and Ricochet, like, explain it to me like I'm a 4-year-old. I want to get this. You know what I'm saying? Because every other nationality, they're proud of their heritage. They're proud to be an Italian American. They're proud. You know what I mean? And so I'm saying to myself, I'm a Black woman and I don't want to be any other race. So why would I say I'm not African American? I'm sure that I am. So it's like you really got two choices. If you're not, I mean, come on. Let's. It's like a rabbit hole, of ridiculousness. I feel like we should be proud of who we are. We should be proud of those that came before us. We should be proud of those that fought for our freedom. And we should use those freedoms right now in order to enact the change that we need for our generations that's coming up. And that's the whole reason behind Street Tea. Street Tea is here to enact that speech for that change. A lot of things that I want to get into, this is just the beginning. And it's just me and you talking. But me and you talking means all of us are talking. Because you're sharing Street Tea's knowledge. You're sharing the posts that are coming about, the Prejudice of the Patriots. This information is getting out there, and that's what I want. I want to change the dialogue of how people are viewing racism and the language of racism and how people are dealing with one another and interacting and reacting with one another. To something that is, more respectful. And I do this because I care about the future of my children. I care about the things that I'm hearing and I'm seeing in the world. And I know that if we took the time to actually learn about who we actually are, learn about the things that were important to us when we gained our freedom, maybe we could figure out how we need to move forward with this freedom. Because right now we have so many things that are standing against us, because there's been no thought about politics. There's been no thoughts about education. Not that there's not been no thoughts, but what I want to say is there's been no action to move the agenda forward. And I think that the change has to come from not only from within the Black community, but also reaching out to other communities. You understand what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, we don't have 50 judges sitting on a panel somewhere saying, oh, well, you know what? We need to get rid of some of these laws that are not fair to the African American community. We need to get rid of a judge, or we need to get rid of, city councilman. Let's vote them out. Let's vote. Let's get politically minded, because these laws are governing our children. And this is what our freedom fighters were fighting for. This is why they went over there. They didn't go over there because they wanted to help the French. They went over there because they wanted to be free in the United States. They wanted to exercise their right to vote, to own homes, you know what I mean, to have a Second Amendment right and use it. They wanted to be more than second-class citizens. And actually, in reality, they weren't even that. They were treated less than at every turn that they could get. So my thing is, if they fought for these freedoms, why are we not fighting for them? Why are we not utilizing? Why are we not pushing for, things that are going to make our community better and encourage us and, and enlighten us on what things we can do to move forward and help one another, especially voting, especially getting, I've heard people talking about, defund the police. Right. Another part of language is F them. I'm just saying to myself, like, what if we had more Black police officers? What if we had more Black lieutenants? What if listen? Remember I told you earlier today, during the video, I said the Air Force didn't exist. Just recently, they have named an Air Force chief, General Charles Q. Brown, and he has been elevated. Okay, and the reason why this is so important is because this is exactly what I'm talking about. I think there should be a lot of positive talk about where the Black community can go from here and how we're going to make that happen. So the last thought I want to leave you with is, when our freedom fighters that I wrote about were in service, there was not even a United States Air Force. Okay. June of this year, June 2020, General Charles Q. Brown Jr. Was elevated to the Air Force's Chief of Staff. This is the highest position you can have in the Air Force. And this is the type of enactment for our speech that I would like to have. I would like for our youth to be inspired to move forward. I don't know what communities they living in. I don't know what neighborhoods they living in. I don't know what homes they living in. But that should not be the deciding factor of their future. So we gotta get an alternative going on where, the success rate for African Americans is going up. Okay? And that's what knowledge does. When I was young and I was 12 years old, and my mother moved me to Pennsylvania, I thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen in my life. And that's the truth. I thought it was the worst thing that could ever happen in my life. But now I know that I wouldn't be here in who I am today if that had not happened. Because where I was from and what I was into definitely wasn't the right thing. But those are the things that surrounded me every day. Those are the things that I seen every day. So we definitely need and have a lot of work to do when it comes to the Black community, our children, and moving forward, to, politically speaking, do things for the community that's going to help us all. And I think that, having good knowledge of what we used to be and who we are today and how that affects us is one of the ways to do it. And I just wanted to take some time and touch upon, like I said, it's a video blog, And I hope that you guys will continue to like, share, follow Street Tea. I'm very excited about the things that we can get into, the paths that we can go on, some known, some unknown, because, God is in control. So we're going to let him take the wheel. But for all of you that are following, I want to say thank you. I appreciate you for being supportive. And we're going to move forward. And just keep in mind that the next part is going to be coming. And when it comes, I want you guys to all check it out. If you read the article to the end, you can see it says coming soon, racial profiling of the voice of dissent. All of the titles are meant to be catchy. All of them are meant to catch your eye, also to raise the thought awareness about how things that have happened so long ago are still affecting us today. We're still fighting those battles on that. We're still on the same front fighting those battles like our soldiers from so long ago. But I want you guys to stay tuned. Part 3 is coming. I'm really excited. You guys have been with me. Feel free to join the group, Street Tea Family. As always, I always end with you guys and I say, be blessed and be the blessing. And I truly hope that, you guys will enjoy the content that I'm putting out and you will continue to invite your family members and friends to do so. Okay? You have a good night and thank you guys for tuning in. Take care. Bye-bye.